There is a quiet question that arrives in the middle decades of life, often unspoken, sometimes pushed aside by the busyness of daily existence. It surfaces when you notice that some people your age seem to be fading, their energy diminishing, their steps slowing, their engagement with life narrowing. And yet others, people of the same age, perhaps even older, remain remarkably vital, clear-eyed, present, and strong. The question is not about luck or genetics, though we often tell ourselves it must be. The question is whether the difference is something we can actually influence, whether the way we are living now is quietly shaping which of these two paths we will follow. What if the things that determine how we age are not mysterious at all, but are patterns so deeply woven into daily life that we have stopped noticing them? And what if understanding those patterns changes everything about how we experience our later decades? You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The art of growing older. A calm inquiry into the patterns of longevity. There is a question that eventually arrives in every thoughtful life. Sometimes in the quiet of early morning. Sometimes during the pause between one obligation and the next. The question is not dramatic or desperate. It arrives simply, as questions do when we have lived long enough to notice patterns. The question is this: why do some people age with such evident grace, maintaining their vitality and clarity well into their later decades, while others seem to diminish more quickly, their bodies and minds surrendering to time at an uneven pace? This is not a question about escaping mortality. No serious person seeks to live forever. The question is about quality, about the experience of living inside a body that continues to serve us well, about maintaining the kind of energy that allows us to remain engaged with life rather than merely observing it from a distance. It is a question about the difference between simply growing older and growing older well. For much of human history, this question was answered with references to fate or fortune or the mysterious workings of heredity. A person either had good genes or they did not. They either came from long-lived stock or they came from families where life was shorter and harder. There was little to be done about it beyond accepting whatever nature had provided. That understanding has shifted considerably in recent decades. Researchers who study the oldest and healthiest human populations have begun to notice patterns that transcend genetics. They have observed communities where people regularly live into their 90s and beyond, not confined to beds or reliant on constant medical intervention, but active, engaged, and surprisingly free of the chronic conditions that plague so many in modern societies. These observations have been studied, analyzed, and distilled into something approaching a coherent picture of what healthy aging actually looks like when it occurs naturally, without the interference of sophisticated medical technology or expensive interventions. What emerges from this research is not a single miracle solution or a revolutionary new treatment. It is something far more interesting and far more accessible. It is a collection of patterns, of habits, of ways of moving through the world that appear again and again in the lives of those who age well. These patterns are not secret. They are not proprietary. They are simply the accumulated wisdom of human bodies living in human environments over many decades. And they are available to anyone willing to consider them with an open and patient mind. The foundational understanding: what aging actually is, before considering how to age well. It may be useful to consider what aging actually is. This is not a simple question, and our understanding of it has evolved considerably over time. For much of medical history, aging was viewed as a kind of inevitable wearing out, like a machine whose parts eventually fail after sufficient use. The body accumulated damage, systems slowed down, and eventually things stopped working. This was understood to be natural and unavoidable. More recent research suggests a somewhat different picture. Aging is not merely passive decay. It is an active process involving numerous biological systems that gradually shift their behavior over time. At the cellular level, changes occur in how energy is produced, how damage is repaired, and how information is maintained. These changes are influenced by countless factors, some of which we cannot control, but many of which are surprisingly responsive to our daily choices. One of the most significant insights to emerge from aging research concerns the role of inflammation. This is not the obvious inflammation of an infected wound or an allergic reaction. This is low-grade, persistent inflammation that operates quietly throughout the body for years or decades. It does not announce itself dramatically. It simply creates an environment in which tissues function less optimally, in which repair processes become less efficient, and in which the body's various systems begin to operate with a kind of low-level friction that was not present in younger years. This chronic, low-grade inflammation has been linked to an extraordinary range of age-related changes. It appears to play a role in the stiffening of arteries, the gradual loss of muscle mass, the changes in brain function that accompany aging, and the increased vulnerability to a host of conditions that become more common as decades accumulate. It is not the only factor, but it is a recurring theme in how researchers now think about the aging process. Another important piece of the puzzle involves the energy-producing structures within our cells. These tiny organelles, present in nearly every cell of the body, are responsible for converting the food we eat into the energy our cells need to function. As we age, these structures tend to become less efficient. They produce more waste products relative to the energy they generate, and they become more vulnerable to damage. This decline in cellular energy production has consequences for every system in the body, from the heart to the brain to the muscles we rely on for movement. There is also the question of how our cells maintain themselves over time. Every cell in the body contains an elaborate system for detecting and repairing damage. When this system functions well, minor injuries and errors are corrected before they accumulate into problems. As we age, these repair systems become less thorough, less efficient. Damage accumulates. Small problems that would have been quickly addressed in a younger body persist and compound. These various changes do not occur in isolation. They interact with each other, creating cascading effects that accelerate over time. Poor cellular energy production increases inflammation. Inflammation impairs repair systems. Impaired repair systems allow more damage to accumulate, which further compromises energy production. This is why aging can sometimes feel like a process that accelerates suddenly. Why a person might feel relatively unchanged for many years and then notice a cascade of changes in a relatively short period. Understanding this interconnected nature of aging is valuable because it suggests that interventions targeting one aspect of the process may have benefits that ripple through the entire system. Improving cellular energy production may reduce inflammation. Reducing inflammation may support better repair. Supporting repair may slow the accumulation of damage. The goal is not to find a single magic bullet, but to create conditions in which the body's natural systems can continue functioning well for as long as possible. The question of genes and inheritance. It is natural to wonder about the role of heredity in all of this. Most of us have looked at our parents and grandparents and wondered whether their patterns of aging might be our own. If they lived long and remained healthy, we feel a quiet sense of reassurance. If they struggled with early decline or specific conditions, we may feel a corresponding sense of concern. The research on this question offers both clarification and reassurance. Genes do matter. There is no question that certain families carry genetic variations that appear to protect against some of the common challenges of aging, while other families may carry variations that increase vulnerability to specific conditions. This is real, and it is not something we can change. However, the influence of genes is not as deterministic as was once believed. Researchers who study long-lived populations have found that genetics accounts for perhaps 20 to 30% of what determines how well we age. The remaining 70 to 80% is shaped by environment, by habits, by the cumulative effect of countless small choices made over decades. This is genuinely encouraging news. It means that while we cannot choose our grandparents, we are not prisoners of their health histories either. The patterns that appear in families are not purely genetic. Families also pass down habits around food, around activity, around how they respond to stress. These learned patterns may be as influential as the genes themselves. And unlike genes, habits can be changed at any age. There is an important nuance here that deserves consideration. The influence of habits and environment is not uniform across all conditions. Some health challenges have a stronger genetic component than others, but the overall picture is clear enough to be meaningful. How we live matters, and it matters a great deal. The choices we make today are not merely preferences. They are signals we send to our bodies about what kind of environment they need to adapt to, what kind of demands they need to prepare for, what kind of future they should expect. The first pattern, movement as medicine. If there is a single factor that appears most consistently in the lives of those who age well, it is the presence of regular, natural movement. This is not the movement of the gym, not the structured exercise of organized fitness classes, not the counting of steps or the tracking of heart rate zones. It is something simpler and more fundamental. It is the movement of a body that is regularly used for the purposes for which bodies were designed. Consider how people moved for most of human history. They walked to obtain water, to tend gardens, to visit neighbors. They bent and stooped to plant and harvest. They carried things from one place to another. They stood while working, sat on the ground rather than in cushioned chairs, climbed hills and stairs as a normal part of daily life. This movement was not exercise. It was simply living. Modern life has largely eliminated this background level of natural movement. We sit in cars, sit at desks, sit on sofas. We outsource physical tasks to machines. We organize our environments for convenience rather than for activity. The result is that many of us move far less than our bodies expect, far less than the bodies we inherited were designed for. The consequences of this shift are significant, and they accumulate over time. Muscles that are not regularly used become weaker and smaller. This process, sometimes called sarcopenia, begins earlier than many people realize and accelerates if not actively addressed. Joints that are not moved through their full range of motion become stiffer and less resilient. Balance, that quiet skill we rarely think about until we lose it, declines without practice. The body adapts to the demands we place upon it. If we place few demands, it adapts by becoming capable of less. There is also a deeper layer to this. Muscle tissue is not merely for movement. It is also a metabolic organ, a reservoir of resources that the body can draw upon in times of need. It plays a role in regulating blood sugar, in maintaining immune function, in supporting the body's response to stress. When we lose muscle mass, we lose more than strength. We lose a kind of metabolic buffer that helps keep numerous systems in balance. The good news is that the body remains responsive to movement at any age. Muscles that have been quiet for years will begin to strengthen again when regularly used. Balance can be improved with practice. Joints become more comfortable when moved through their full range. The body is remarkably willing to adapt to new demands, even late in life. What does this look like in practical terms? For those who age well, movement tends to be woven into the fabric of daily life rather than compartmentalized into scheduled sessions. They walk rather than drive for short trips. They garden, which involves a remarkable variety of movements. They climb stairs without looking for elevators. They carry their own groceries. They do not necessarily think of themselves as exercising. They simply live in a body that is regularly used. There is wisdom in this approach. When movement is embedded in daily life, it happens consistently without requiring motivation or willpower. It does not depend on finding time in a busy schedule because it is the schedule. It does not require special equipment or facilities. It is simply the natural expression of a body engaging with its environment. For those whose lives have become more sedentary, reintroducing this kind of natural movement often requires some conscious redesign. It may mean choosing the farther parking spot, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, setting aside time for a walk after a meal, taking up a physical hobby that provides genuine enjoyment. The goal is not to achieve a specific fitness level, but to restore movement to its rightful place as a normal, unremarkable part of daily existence. The second pattern, food as information. The relationship between what we eat and how we age is complex, and it has been the subject of endless debate, confusion, and conflicting advice. Amidst this noise, certain patterns emerge with sufficient consistency to warrant attention. These patterns are not about specific diets or rigid rules. They are about tendencies, about the kinds of eating that appear most commonly among populations where healthy aging is the norm rather than the exception. One of the most consistent observations concerns the overall quantity of food. In many of the populations studied by longevity researchers, people tend to eat somewhat less than their counterparts in wealthy, industrialized nations. This is not starvation, not deprivation. It is simply a pattern of stopping before feeling completely full, of eating until satisfied rather than until stuffed. The biological mechanisms that might explain this observation are still being studied, but several hypotheses have emerged. Reducing overall food intake appears to reduce the metabolic load on cells, potentially decreasing the production of damaging byproducts. It may also trigger cellular repair processes that are more active when resources are somewhat limited. There is even evidence that lower calorie intake is associated with reduced inflammation. That quiet background inflammation that appears to accelerate so many aspects of aging. Another consistent pattern concerns the variety of plant foods consumed. In communities where healthy aging is common, meals tend to include a wide range of vegetables, fruits, legumes, and other plant foods. This is not about eating a single superfood or relying on a particular supplement. It is about diversity, about providing the body with a broad spectrum of the compounds that plants produce. Plants contain thousands of biologically active compounds beyond the vitamins and minerals that have been formally identified. Many of these compounds appear to have protective effects, supporting the body's natural defense systems, reducing inflammation, and interacting with cellular processes in ways that are still not fully understood. Eating a wide variety of plant foods is a way of accessing this diversity without needing to understand every individual component. There is also a pattern around the processing of food. In populations that age well, food tends to be closer to its natural state. Grains are whole rather than refined. Vegetables are recognizable as vegetables. Meat, when eaten, is often from animals that lived in something approaching their natural conditions. This is not about purity or absolutism. It is about the observation that heavily processed foods, stripped of their natural fiber and supplemented with various additives, tend to be associated with less favorable health outcomes. Fiber deserves particular attention in this context. It is not a nutrient in the conventional sense, since the body does not digest it, but it plays a crucial role in how the digestive system functions and, through the digestive system, influences the rest of the body. Fiber feeds the beneficial bacteria that live in the gut. These bacteria, in turn, produce compounds that influence inflammation, immune function, and even brain health. When fiber intake is low, this internal ecosystem suffers. and the effects ripple outward. The patterns of eating that support healthy aging also tend to include a different relationship with sugar and refined carbohydrates than is common in modern diets. This is not about eliminating sugar entirely, which would be both impractical and joyless. It is about recognizing that frequent, large doses of sugar create metabolic stress, that they challenge the systems that regulate blood sugar, that they contribute to inflammation and to the accumulation of body fat in ways that other foods do not. There is no single diet that captures all of these patterns perfectly. The Mediterranean diet incorporates many of them, as do traditional diets from parts of Asia, from Scandinavia, from various regions where healthy aging has been observed. The common threads are more important than the specific cultural expressions. Lower overall calories, abundant plant foods, minimal processing, adequate fiber, limited sugar. These patterns appear again and again, suggesting that they reflect something fundamental about how human bodies respond to food over long periods. The third pattern, the unseen world within. In recent years, scientific attention has turned increasingly to the vast community of microorganisms that lives within the human body. This internal ecosystem, comprising trillions of bacteria, fungi, and other microscopic life forms, is most concentrated in the digestive tract, but its influence extends far beyond digestion. It appears to play a role in immune function, in inflammation, in brain health, in metabolism, in the very processes that shape how we age. This is a relatively new area of research, and much remains unknown. But certain patterns have emerged with sufficient clarity to be useful. The diversity of this internal ecosystem appears to matter. People with a wider variety of microbial species tend to show different health trajectories than those with less diverse internal communities. This diversity is not fixed. It changes in response to diet, to environment, to the medications we take, to countless other factors. The relationship between diet and this internal ecosystem is particularly significant. The bacteria in the gut feed primarily on the components of food that we cannot digest ourselves, particularly the various forms of fiber that pass through the small intestine intact. When these fibers reach the large intestine, they become food for the microbial community. Different types of fiber feed different types of bacteria, which is one reason why dietary variety matters. When the diet lacks sufficient fiber, the microbial community shifts. Species that depend on fiber decline. Other species, some of which may be less beneficial, increase to fill the available space. The overall diversity decreases. The ecosystem becomes less robust, less resilient, less capable of performing the various functions that support health. The products of this microbial activity are also significant. When bacteria feed on fiber, they produce various compounds that enter the bloodstream and influence the rest of the body. Some of these compounds appear to reduce inflammation. Others support the integrity of the gut barrier, the thin layer of cells that separates the contents of the digestive tract from the rest of the body. Still others influence brain function through pathways that are still being mapped. This gut-brain connection is one of the more fascinating developments in recent research. The microbial community in the gut communicates with the brain through multiple channels, including the vagus nerve, the immune system, and various chemical messengers. Changes in the gut ecosystem can influence mood, cognition, and even the risk of neurological changes associated with aging. This does not mean that the gut determines brain health entirely, but it does suggest a level of connection that was not previously appreciated. The vulnerability of this internal ecosystem to certain medications is also becoming clearer. Antibiotics, while invaluable for treating bacterial infections, do not distinguish between harmful pathogens and beneficial residents of the gut. A course of antibiotics can significantly disrupt the microbial community, reducing diversity and eliminating species that may not readily return. This is not an argument against using antibiotics when necessary. It is an observation that their use has consequences beyond the immediate infection, consequences that may warrant attention and support afterward. Other medications, dietary patterns, and environmental factors also influence this internal ecosystem. The use of certain acid-suppressing medications changes the environment of the digestive tract in ways that affect microbial populations. Chlorinated water, antibacterial soaps, and other features of modern sanitation reduce our exposure to environmental microbes, which may limit the opportunities for our internal ecosystem to acquire new and beneficial species. For those interested in supporting this internal ecosystem, the most consistent advice is also the simplest. Eat a wide variety of plant foods, particularly those rich in different types of fiber. Include fermented foods that contain live bacteria, though the extent to which these bacteria colonize the gut remains uncertain. Minimize unnecessary disruption from medications when possible. Spend time in natural environments, which expose us to a wider range of environmental microbes. These practices do not guarantee a robust internal ecosystem, but they create conditions in which such an ecosystem is more likely to thrive. The fourth pattern, light and rhythm. There is a dimension of health that operates below the level of conscious awareness, influencing our bodies through pathways we rarely consider. This is the dimension of light and darkness, of daily and seasonal rhythms, of the subtle signals that synchronize our internal systems with the external world. These signals are not optional. They are fundamental to how biological organisms function, and disrupting them has consequences that accumulate over time. The most powerful of these signals is the daily cycle of light and darkness. Human bodies evolved under conditions where days were bright and nights were dark, where the transition between them was gradual and predictable. This cycle became embedded in our biology, influencing the timing of hormone release, the regulation of body temperature, the rhythm of sleep and wakefulness, the activity of countless genes that operate on daily schedules. Modern life has disrupted this ancient relationship. We spend most of our time indoors, under artificial light that is far dimmer than daylight, but far brighter than natural darkness after sunset. We extend our days well into the night, exposing ourselves to light at hours when our bodies expect darkness. We shift our schedules erratically, confusing the internal clocks that evolved to expect regularity. The consequences of this disruption are increasingly recognized. Poor sleep, one of the most common results of irregular light exposure, has been linked to numerous aspects of aging. During sleep, the brain performs essential maintenance, clearing waste products that accumulate during waking hours. The body repairs tissues, consolidates memories, regulates metabolism. When sleep is consistently inadequate, these processes are compromised. The timing of light exposure also influences the production of melatonin, a hormone that is often discussed only in the context of sleep, but that has broader functions. Melatonin is an antioxidant, helping to protect cells from damage. It influences immune function and inflammation. It helps regulate the daily rhythms of various organs. When light exposure at night suppresses melatonin production, these functions may be affected. For those seeking to support healthy aging, attending to these rhythms is a practical consideration. Morning exposure to natural light helps synchronize the internal clock, signaling that the active phase of the day has begun, dimming lights in the evening, reducing exposure to screens, and creating a dark, sleeping environment support the transition into the restorative phase of the daily cycle. These practices are not complicated, but they require a degree of intentionality that modern life does not naturally provide. Seasonal rhythms also matter, though they receive less attention than daily ones. Human bodies evolved in environments that changed across the year, with variations in temperature, in food availability, in day length. Our biology still responds to these changes, even when our environments buffer us from them. There is evidence that immune function, metabolism, and even mood fluctuate with the seasons in ways that are not merely cultural. Attending to seasonal rhythms might mean eating more warming foods in cold months and lighter foods in warm months. It might mean adjusting activity levels to match the demands of the season, resting more in winter and being more active in summer. It might simply mean spending time outdoors across the year, experiencing the changing light and temperature rather than remaining in the unchanging environment of climate-controlled interiors. The fifth pattern: connection and purpose. There is a category of influence on healthy aging that does not fit neatly into biological explanations, yet its effects are consistently observed across populations. This is the domain of social connection, of meaningful activity, of the sense that one's life has purpose and value. Researchers who study long-lived communities often note that these factors appear as prominently as diet or exercise in distinguishing those who age well from those who do not. The mechanisms through which social connection influences physical health are multiple and intertwined. Isolation and loneliness are associated with higher levels of inflammation, with changes in immune function, with alterations in stress hormone patterns. The body appears to interpret social disconnection as a threat, activating stress responses that, when chronic, accelerate the aging process. There is also a behavioral dimension. People who are socially connected tend to be more active, more engaged with life, more likely to maintain the habits that support health. They have reasons to get up in the morning, reasons to care for themselves, reasons to look forward to the future. These reasons are not abstract. They are woven into the fabric of daily life, into relationships and responsibilities and shared activities. The concept of purpose is related but distinct, having a sense that one's life matters, that one has something to contribute, that one's presence in the world makes a difference, appears to have protective effects that operate independently of social connection. People with a strong sense of purpose show different patterns of brain aging, different trajectories of physical decline, different responses to stress than those who feel their lives lack direction. This is not about grand achievements or world-changing contributions. Purpose can be found in caring for grandchildren, in maintaining a garden, in volunteering at a local organization, in creating art that will never be widely seen, in simply being present for others who need support. It is about having a reason to engage with life, a reason to continue growing and learning and contributing. The loss of purpose that sometimes accompanies retirement or the departure of children or the death of a spouse is not merely emotional. It has physical consequences, consequences that can be measured in health outcomes. This is why maintaining engagement with life, finding new sources of meaning as old ones fade, is not just a matter of happiness, but a matter of health. For those in the later decades of life, this pattern suggests the importance of actively cultivating connection and purpose. It may mean making intentional efforts to maintain and deepen relationships, to find communities of shared interest, to take on roles that provide a sense of contribution. It may mean redefining purpose as circumstances change, finding new ways to matter when old ways are no longer available. These are not trivial pursuits. They are as fundamental to healthy aging as any biological factor. The sixth pattern: the wisdom of moderation. Across the various patterns that characterize healthy aging, a common thread emerges that is worth considering directly. This is the principle of moderation, of balance, of avoiding extremes in any direction. It appears in how long-lived populations eat, in how they move, in how they approach work and rest, in how they respond to the pleasures and challenges of life. This is not moderation as deprivation. not the careful rationing of enjoyment. It is moderation as the avoidance of chronic excess. The recognition that the body responds differently to occasional indulgences than to sustained patterns of overconsumption. It is the difference between a glass of wine with friends and daily heavy drinking, between a rich meal on a special occasion and a diet consistently high in processed foods, between working hard on a project and working to the point of chronic exhaustion. The biological basis for this principle lies in how the body adapts to demands. Brief periods of stress, whether from exercise or fasting or challenging experiences, trigger adaptive responses that leave the body stronger and more resilient. Sustained stress, without adequate recovery, leads to depletion and damage. The difference is not in the stress itself, but in its pattern, in the rhythm of challenge and recovery that allows adaptation without exhaustion. This rhythm appears in many contexts. Physical activity is most beneficial when it includes both exertion and rest. Mental work is most productive when it includes both focus and distraction. Social engagement is most rewarding when it includes both connection and solitude. The body and mind are not designed for constant output. They are designed for cycles, for oscillation between different states, for the natural rhythm of effort and recovery. The populations that age well seem to understand this intuitively. They do not push themselves to extremes in pursuit of health. They do not exercise compulsively or restrict their diets obsessively or structure their lives around the latest longevity protocols. They simply live in a way that includes both activity and rest, both indulgence and restraint, both engagement and withdrawal. This balance is not calculated. It is simply the natural expression of a life lived in reasonable harmony with human biology. The integration, how patterns work together. Considering these patterns separately is useful for understanding, but it risks missing how they actually function in real lives. They do not operate in isolation. They interact, reinforce each other, create cascading effects that are greater than the sum of their parts. Movement influences appetite and metabolism, affecting what and how much we eat. What we eat influences the internal ecosystem of the gut, which influences inflammation and immune function. Light exposure and daily rhythms influence sleep, which influences recovery and repair. Social connection and purpose influence stress levels, which influence numerous physiological systems. Each pattern touches the others, creating a complex web of influences that cannot be reduced to simple cause and effect. This interconnectedness has practical implications. It means that improvements in one area tend to support improvements in others. Starting a regular walking practice may naturally lead to changes in eating patterns, to better sleep, to increase social contact if the walking is done with others. Improving sleep may lead to more energy for movement, to better food choices, to greater capacity for engagement with life. The system tends toward coherence, toward aligning its various components in a consistent direction. It also means that no single pattern is decisive. Someone who exercises diligently but eats poorly, sleeps inadequately, and lives in isolation is unlikely to achieve the same outcomes as someone who addresses multiple patterns in a balanced way. The goal is not perfection in any one domain, but reasonable attention across the domains that matter. This is encouraging because it means there are many paths to the same destination. Different people will find different combinations of practices that work for their circumstances, their preferences, their limitations. The patterns provide direction without dictating specifics, principles without rigid rules. The question of when to start. A question that sometimes arises when considering these patterns is whether it is too late to begin. For those already in their later decades, who have not been particularly attentive to these factors in earlier years, there may be a sense that the opportunity for meaningful change has passed. The research suggests otherwise. The body remains responsive to positive influences at any age. People who begin exercising in their 70s and 80s still gain strength, still improve their balance, still experience benefits. People who change their eating patterns in later years still see improvements in relevant health markers. The capacity for adaptation does not disappear with age. It only diminishes. There is also the reality that the later decades can be many decades. A person who reaches 65 in reasonable health may have 20 or 30 or more years ahead. Those years can be lived with vitality and engagement or with decline and limitation. The choices made in the 60s and 70s shaped the experience of the 80s and 90s, just as choices made earlier shaped the later years. This is not about regret for past choices or anxiety about future ones. It is simply a recognition that the present moment is always the only moment in which change is possible. The patterns that support healthy aging are available at every stage of life. They do not require a perfect history. They only require a willingness to begin. A calm conclusion. The study of healthy aging, when approached without hype or sensationalism, reveals something quietly reassuring. The factors that distinguish those who age well from those who do not are not mysterious or inaccessible. They are not locked away in expensive treatments or experimental protocols. They are woven into the fabric of ordinary life, into how we move and eat and sleep and connect with others. This does not mean that healthy aging is guaranteed or easy. It requires attention, intention, the willingness to structure life in ways that may not always align with convenience or cultural norms. It requires accepting that some aspects of aging are beyond our control while acting on those that are within it. It requires patience, because the effects of these patterns unfold over years and decades, not days and weeks. But there is a kind of wisdom in this slowness. The patterns that support healthy aging are not interventions to be applied and then abandoned. They are ways of living that can be sustained indefinitely, that can become as natural as breathing, that can shape not only how long we live, but how we experience the living of it. The goal is not to reach some advanced age in a state of suspended animation, preserved but not truly alive. The goal is to continue living fully, to remain engaged with the world and with the people we love, to keep learning and growing and contributing for as long as we are here. The patterns described here support that goal not by fighting against time, but by working with the grain of human biology, by creating conditions in which the body and mind can continue functioning well for as long as they are meant to. In the end, the art of growing older is simply the art of living reasonably well for a very long time. It is not complicated, though it requires attention. It is not mysterious, though it rewards reflection. It is available to anyone willing to consider it seriously and to make the small, consistent choices that accumulate into a life lived well across many decades. The patterns we have explored together are not secrets reserved for a fortunate few. They are not experimental treatments or revolutionary breakthroughs that will be announced in tomorrow's headlines. They are observations, collected over decades of watching how human beings actually age when they are given the right conditions, the right habits, the right relationship with their own bodies and with the world around them. The single most important takeaway from everything we have considered is this: how we age is shaped far more by how we live than by the genes we were given. And it is never too late to begin living differently. If something in this conversation has stirred a recognition, a sense that there is more to your own story than you have yet written, we would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you would like to continue exploring the wisdom of healthy aging, we invite you to explore the other recordings in this library and to subscribe so that new wisdom finds its way to you when it becomes available. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.